the main display going to come up? All right. Okay. Okay, everybody, we'll get underway. Thank you for your attendance and welcome everybody to this meeting of the Development Plan Panel. My name is Councillor John Garvani and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being live streamed on the City Council YouTube panel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves? If we could start from my left.
Good afternoon, my name is Matthew Brook. I'm a Principal Planning Officer in the Planning Policy team responsible for housing delivery and supply.
Yeah, good afternoon everyone. Javed Akhtar, Councillor for London and Woodhouse, Chair North and East Plan Panel.
Good afternoon everyone. Councillor Paul Ray, Councillor Riverside Ward and Chair of South and West Plans Panel.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlyle, Carlin Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jess Lennox, Executive Board Member for Housing and Housing Growth.
Good morning, Councillor Jonathan Pryor, Deputy Leader of the Council and Executive Member for Economy, Housing and... Economy, Transport. I'm sorry, I'm taking Councillor Lennox's role. Economy, Transport and Sustainable Development.
Councillor Jules Hesselwood, representing Wheatwood Ward and Chair of City Plans Panel.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Colin Campbell, a panel member.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adland Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Clerk to the panel.
Afternoon, Nicole Walker, Legal Advisor to the panel.
Good afternoon, David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer.
Good afternoon, Adam Harver, Group Manager for Policy and Plans.
Thank you. Toby, can you run through items 1 to 5, please?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So, agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item number 2, there are no items which would require the exclusion of the press and the public. Item number 3, there are no formal late items. Item number 4, can I ask members to declare any interest? Thank you. And agenda item number 5, apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Finnegan. Thank you, Chair.
And we also have apologies from Martin Elliott due to a family bereavement. Okay, item number 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 17th of July. Do members accept these as a true and correct record? I'll assume correct unless otherwise indicated. Any comments on those? I know there's the item about writing to the planning officer. I delayed doing that for various reasons, of it being summer, I think, mainly. And then the new NPPF came out and I thought, well, hang about, is there going to be stuff in there that impinges on this? And I think we're going to be covering that under Adam's piece on that. So that's why that letter hasn't as yet been done. It may still be done if we think it's necessary. Okay, item 7, consultation response to proposed reforms to the NPPF and other changes to the planning system. These are pages 17 to 40 in your pack.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as detailed in the report, on the 30th of July of this year, the government launched an 8-week consultation on proposed revisions to both the NPPF and a series of wider planning reforms. The consultation raised 106 detailed questions with responses due by the 24th of September. At Appendix 1 is the proposed draft response to this consultation, and members are asked both to note this and to provide comments on the proposed response before it is submitted by the Chief Planner in consultation with the Executive Member. The report seeks to highlight and summarise some of the key proposed changes, but this is a complex and detailed consultation, so inevitably the report does not touch on all matters. The two aspects of the consultation that have perhaps raised the most national attention are the revised approach to calculating local housing numbers and new policy regarding green belt and grey belt. So if we start with housing numbers, a number of the changes proposed seek to reverse previous government amendments, which at that time sought to reduce the weight given to a standard method for calculating housing numbers. The proposed changes now make clear that local authorities will be expected to make best efforts to allocate land to meet needs in line with their housing target. Using that new standard method, which is based on a calculation factoring in overall housing stock and affordability multipliers, generates a figure for Leeds of 4,159 housing units per annum. This number is, or figure rather, is expected to be a significant challenge in Leeds, given that we've only met that number once since 1980. And as a result, this proposed figure does have significant implications for future plan making, particularly Leeds Local Plan 2040. As detailed in the report, Leeds does have a healthy land supply position at the moment, well in excess of the 5-year supply requirement, which is, as I say, a requirement. However, this will be reduced by the new housing target, although, to clarify, it will remain above the 5-year target. As referred to in paragraph 10 of the report, the draft response supports a number of the proposed measures that are contained within this draft MPPF. However, the proposed response does raise concerns with the deliverability of the proposed targets, particularly for some areas of the north of England, and also seeks to remind government that it is not local planning authorities that build homes, but house builders, and where up-to-date plans are in place with sufficient deliverable allocations and permissions, the onus should be on developers to deliver them, not on local planning authorities to release yet more land. To do otherwise does risk further undermining public trust in plan making. In addition, the Council's draft response suggests that more should be done to enshrine affordable housing in targets rather than just market housing, particularly given that affordability is a major element of the housing number calculation in the new revised standard method. With regards to greenbelts, the proposed changes to the MPPF make it very clear that a requirement to meet needs for development will constitute what is known as exceptional circumstances to justify releasing land from the greenbelt. This comes alongside requirements to undertake a greenbelt review, which is already well underway as part of Leeds Local Plan 2040, but a new definition of this term grey belt, which is clarified to mean land that is in the green belt but is either previously developed or makes a limited contribution to the 5 purposes of Greenbelt as defined in the MPPF. Overall, it is considered that the proposed measures would weaken protection for the Greenbelt in the interest of increasing provision of housing and other necessary development. Whilst the draft response supports many of the proposed changes to Greenbelt policy, concerns are raised with the decision-making process for supporting development on Greenbelt land, as the proposed changes do appear to allow this to take place outside of the plan-making process, which officers consider to be the most appropriate route. It is not felt that speculative ad hoc development in the Greenbelt would lead to sustainable development. There are a range of other proposed changes throughout the consultation, and as detailed at paragraph 17 of the report onwards, there is support for proposed changes with regard to affordable housing, removal of the term beauty, renewable energy changes, those related to highways, previously developed land, planning fees, the duty to cooperate, and broad design measures. However, the draft response does also request further clarity on elements relating to economic development, particularly why sectors like advanced manufacturing are not being prioritised in the same way that sectors such as freight and logistics are, and further clarity on the infrastructure levy. With regards to the latter, the government has indicated a desire to drop plans for an infrastructure levy, but at this point there is not clarity on how it is expected that new development will come alongside necessary infrastructure. In addition, related to questions surrounding renewable energy and energy efficiency, as Councillor Garvani referred to, the opportunity has been taken in the response that government review and potentially revokes the written ministerial statement that members will be well aware of, that's been detailed here a number of times due to the negative impacts this has had on the local plan update. with its apparent intention of reducing local authorities' ability to set ambitious new standards for energy efficiency. I will leave it there, Chair, if that's okay, as I know there's a lot of questions associated with the consultation, and I want to make sure that members have sufficient time to raise comments and ask questions. Obviously, you can clarify any further matters as they arise.
Any questions for the officers, for Adam? Peter, Councillor Carlow.
Thank you. Just wanted to raise some questions around the green belt and grey belt prospect there. So grey belt understood, and we've had some developments in your own ward, Chair, that have been in what would be deemed as the grey belt, the former college building in Horsforth, for instance, which was previously developed, and we decided that that should therefore be developed for housing because nobody was going to turn it back into green rolling fields. But it puts some weight on obviously the functions of green belt. So how would that clarify in areas where, so in some areas of the city there is a lot of green belt. In some areas, such as along the Bradford border, there is very little green belt remaining. Obviously, some could say then that it has a valid function as green belt because there is very little green belt access in there and is performing a really valid point. However, there's been an ongoing creep into that area rather than maybe other areas of green belt where there are large swathes. And I wondered how that would fit through with the plan. What would we see being the most important aspects of green belt? The very small amount that's left, or the large swathes that obviously have a larger value overall?
Thank you, Councillor Carlow. I don't think national policy allows for, say, any of those 5 purposes having more weight than another. But in terms of how we would weight land in that area, specifically in terms of the gap between Bradford and Leeds, clearly one of the 5 tests is the role that Greenbelt plays in preventing neighbouring towns from merging. Now, it's probably a judgment call whether that's happened or not, and I think that is quite a tricky question. At parts along that border, there is clearly a green belt gap, and that's serving a very useful function. At other points, you could argue that gap has already gone down to borderline nothing, but it's a slim sliver, I suppose you could argue. So I think the proper process to go through that discussion is through the Green Belt Review, which what it's seeking to do is chunk up the city's green belt into a series of parcels, rather than through the site allocation plan, where members might recall we looked at things on a site-by-site basis as they were proposed to us. This approach is a little bit different, and it tries to use what we've considered to be recent best practice from other local authorities, where we try and divide that land in larger segments, but related to, say, land constrained between roads, other hard barriers like railway lines. And if you do that process, you arrive at a series of parcels. Then assess those parcels against those 5 purposes of Greenbelt. So I think it's clear that where it's serving a function of preventing 2 towns from merging, I think that will have significant weight as its function of Greenbelt. I think, as we request, I think we would benefit from further clarity on how a Greenbelt review should take place if the government's got strong ideas on that, which clearly Greenbelt seems a major part of their consideration. So it would be beneficial, I think, if we could have a bit more clarification on those points. But certainly, as I say, to reiterate, where we think land is performing a really useful function of preventing, towns from merging, then that will have significant weight. I think where clarity might be beneficial is where those settlements aren't technically towns, and the word town is very specifically used. Does that apply to every settlement? It's a little unclear, I think, at this stage. I think that would be beneficial to have a bit more clarity, given the role that potentially Greenbelt's going to play.
It was just to add to Adam's comments, Councillor, really. I think Adam's covered it. I think the point here is I think before we get to Greenbelt, and whatever grey belt might be, I think we need to be satisfied that other sources of supply have been appropriately maximised. So the whole debate around previously developed land, viability, rates of delivery, sustainable locations within existing urban areas, etc., etc. I think all of that is integral to the debate on Greenbelt in terms of how much and where and what it is. But in terms of the Greenbelt point specifically, it's just to echo, I think, some of Adam's observations in the sense that, Greenbelt performs a spatial function rather than a qualitative one. It's not about its attractiveness as countryside per se. It's performing this spatial function within the context of the 5 tests. And I think it's right and proper in doing that is the need to do a comprehensive Greenbelt review, as Adam has outlined, because on that basis you can take a strategic and consistent view about it, rather than looking at individual sites as pockets of land in isolation. And I think that whole overview is really important in terms of looking at what the supply needs to be, the character of that green belt, and how it relates to existing places. So I think it's the thoroughness of that process which is key.
Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. I've figured out how to work it now. So you'll be pleased to know it's not my intention to go through my view on all of the responses. We are doing our own response as a group, so I very much see this as the Council's response, so I don't think there's any merit or great help in giving our commentary on it today. The one sort of wider point that I wanted to make, and I'd be interested in Adam's and David's view on it, that I think, like all government planning changes, there's good things and bad things, pluses and minuses, some things that are much needed, some things not so much. My concern overall is the direction of travel is putting the supply of housing much more firmly in the hands of developers and volume house builders because of the approach being taken, rather than actually doing anything to help speed up the building of houses. And I think I made the point last time, there are 1.3 million live consents in the country, and what we need is something that's going to get the builders to build what they've got permission for before we start giving away huge swathes of green belt, and so this is, I think we all have to be clear, and I hope the government are clear, that this is not the silver bullet to suddenly massively increase the building of houses in the country, and in some ways it could have the opposite effect, that we just have more land available and the developers will cherry pick which bits they want to build on. So that's sort of the broad concern. I think to a degree, looking through the responses proposed, you are capturing that a bit. I think we'll probably go a bit further in our response. That's probably not a surprise either. So yeah, welcome your thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Yeah, I think I think we do try and reflect fairly similar thoughts in our response. I think it's inarguable that there is a great need for increased housing in those communities where it's shown to be needed, and the evidence supports that. And you can see, we obviously got a later item about the strategic housing market assessment, but that shows there is a real affordability crisis in Leeds, and we know through the work the government have done that exists throughout the country. But I do agree, and the point I made in the introduction, that, as I say, whilst elements of councils, clearly, we have a really good council housing growth team doing a huge amount of great work to increase the delivery of council housing. Local planning authorities don't build houses, and we are quite keen to make that point, that without a shift in the model of the major house builders, that there is a risk of exactly the scenario you suggest there, Councillor Lamb, that we release a lot more land but don't necessarily deliver a huge amount more housing. And I think this is part of the answer, in the sense that we know that there are a lot of local authorities around the country that that don't have up-to-date local plans, and the government is clearly very keen to make sure that that issue is addressed. But if it doesn't come hand in hand with further incentivisation to make sure that developers are building out their permissions, then yes, I think there will be further issues, and this won't solve the overall problem.
Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Campbell. It was just to add to Adam's comment, really. I think we recognise, Councillor Lamb, that planning is just one part of the solution here, isn't it? And that in terms of housing delivery, you know, the role of planning authorities is key, but that's wrapped up in a whole range of other mechanisms and interventions, you know, the fiscal environment, you know, all of those factors all contribute to the extent and nature of house building and delivery. And I think our response is sort of trying to speak to those issues as well as flagging the planning merits of what's been said as well. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
I think this is sort of a range of comments stroke questions, really, but I'm slightly concerned that I think the government, under pressure to do something, is not doing what I think they might be trying to do with the health service, which is step back and say, what do you want? What do we want to do? Because at the moment we appear to be tinkering with the system that currently exists. And if I'm honest, I don't think it works that well. That's just a personal view. And I think I worry that they've been sold this mantra that we had in spades with the previous government, which is, if only you let us build more houses, the price will drop. And our experience over, well, let's face it, for the last 50 years is it doesn't work, because there's in many ways there's a fixed market created by the major house builders. So if we just talk about a few things, I agree with the point that we need to make government understand that we are quite happy to give permission. We almost gave permission for 300 units last week, but we can't guarantee that they'll be built, and I think that's our major frustration as Plans Panel members, that we spend a lot of time and effort trying to get a development that suits an area, and then it never happens. I think the idea of a national methodology for calculation is a good idea. Is good. I think it may not be to our benefit, but I think it allows, or it doesn't allow, certain authorities to hide behind various, well, I was going to say various public outcries, particularly the issue they had in the South East with the previous targets. So it does mean that everybody's transparent, and this is how we're working it out, and etc. And I think, as you say, we do currently have a 7-year supply. If we are not careful, we are going to run out of supply. And I was just wondering if there's any indication whether, once we've gone through the consultation and targets being set, whether that target's retrospective to our development plan, or whether we'll be allowed, in effect, as part of the review of the local plan, to then, in fact, factor that into the equation. I think I'm the exceptional circumstances around the green belt are something that I don't really understand, if I'm honest. And it appears to be that anything's an exception if you make a good enough argument. And I do think we need to try and bottom what that means. The same is true with grey belt. I think I would like a clear definition of what grey belt is, because we all know of sites within the green belt which were, say, former factories, but I suppose there are other sites that developers are now coming forward and saying this is a former development site, but if you end up go on site visits, it appears to be countryside because it's so long since there was active use on the site. I suppose if I'm honest, and it's not a popular comment, but if I'm honest, I think if we are, as a nation and as a city, to build as many houses as we're being asked to do, then the green belt is under pressure. I'm not sure. Well, as somebody who sat on the original SLA and everything, we've been extremely lucky, I think, in Leeds because the city centre has soaked up a tremendous amount of housing, which none of us expected when we sat down and drew the plans up. And I don't think there's that capacity there anymore. I think affordables, I appreciate that the government's trying to get us to build more affordable housing, or get more affordable housing, but we constantly have the battle with developers around it's unaffordable. And I would like to see affordable houses made mandatory as part of a national piece of legislation which says if this is the council's policy for X or this area, then that's what you provide. That's one of your built-in costs. I know they're talking about this magic figure of 50% in certain places. So if they can do it for that, I don't see why they shouldn't say to us, if you have a reasonable set of criteria, if you can back that with evidence, you know, 5% in the city centre has to be 5%, 30% in the outer areas has to be 30%. You can't argue out of that. And I also think when we talk about the infrastructure levy, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think it's time, if we're not having an infrastructure levy, to review the SIL. Because the criteria we used to set the original SIL figures has been superseded quite substantially, in my opinion, particularly around the city centre. And I will hold my hand up and say I haven't read every question, mainly because the prints are small. So if, but I'm generally happy with our drafted response.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Campbell. There's obviously a lot of comments there, Councillor Campbell. Just thinking through, I think you're absolutely right in terms of, as we've previously discussed, in terms of, I think almost every member here is associated with a panel that has granted a huge amount of permissions over recent years. And we shouldn't forget that last year we had an absolutely fantastic year for housing delivery in Leeds, you know, well in excess of 4,000 units. I think as a collective, a huge amount of effort is being made to deliver much needed housing throughout the city, and I think that is bearing fruit. Whether that scale can continue every year, I think is going to be a real challenge, but I think it's certainly not for the lack of effort at the authority level. Similar to you, Councillor Campbell, I think as made clear in the draft response, it is very helpful to have a national methodology for generating a housing number. I think we can always argue how that methodology has been calculated and whether we agree with the number, but I think for those of us who were kind of at the core strategy examination and the amount of time taken to debate and argue over what the housing number should or shouldn't be, for local authorities across the country to not have to have that argument in the same way, there might still be exceptions where you might want to argue a different number, but as a broad principle, I think that's definitely beneficial. You do raise, though, a point about the housing number and how does that get dealt with through the local plan process. And I think we'll come on to, obviously, in terms of the item regarding LLP 2040, but it is a confusing picture at the moment in terms of the housing number, because Matt will probably correct me here, well, hopefully correct me if I'm wrong, but because we have a situation where the core strategy selective review is now 5 years old, our housing target reverts to the previous version of the MPPF with uplift, which is about, well, it was 4,080, but I think the calculation generates a number that's just below 4,000 now. Once this new MPPF is published, we'll then have another number again, which is this 4,100 and odd. So it is a complex picture at the moment, what the authority's number would be alongside that method. There is the ability, clearly through the process of a local plan, local plan process, to argue and get found sound that that number is not appropriate for your area. There are some quoted, I think, exemptions. There's things like areas of outstanding natural beauty, national parks. I don't think that's seen as an exhaustive list. I think the argument could still be made that a different number should be arrived at, and some authorities, I dare say, will want a higher number than what they've been given, and some might want a lower one. We obviously need to work through that because we don't have a fixed number yet, because we don't know the result of how the government will review all the comments that have been made and whether they make any alterations to the methodology. But I agree, it is a complex situation in terms of that housing number. In terms of exceptional circumstances, previously that's always been kept purposefully vague, similarly to things like very special circumstances, to allow for decision makers to arrive at well-reasoned justifications on the merits that they see fit. I think the government in this have tried to be clearer about what they would expect to be exceptional circumstances for the Greenbelt, and clearly make clear about that meeting your needs for housing and other development is going to be one of them. I think in terms of grey belts, absolutely, we I think through the response have also requested that further clarification would be beneficial, and completely take your point that there is a very blurred line between when previously development land returns to being greenfield again, which can happen with enough time, and it'll always be a kind of a matter of fact and degree, that one. I think my reflection on it is that yes, the Greenbelt is going to be under pressure, but we may feel that for the needs of parts of the city, that Greenbelt release is the most sustainable way of meeting those needs. I think as Matt has talked about in previous workshops, it's really beneficial that we've delivered a lot of housing on brownfield sites in the city centre in the inner area, but it does have consequences for delivering needs in outer areas that don't have the availability of those kind of sites. So there is a kind of a trade-off there. Can the city centre continue to deliver at the rate that it has? We don't know, is the honest answer. I mean, I think with things like mass transit, Leeds transformational regen, I think there is further opportunities for densification on appropriate sites. But that's something that obviously will be reviewed as part of this plan-making process. I think we would agree about your point about mandatory affordable targets. I think that would be really beneficial, to be honest. And if, as suggested, the government are proposing essentially a mandatory target for Greenbelt land of 50%, to be able to beef up the requirement for affordable housing on other sites, I think would be really beneficial. At the moment, the way that the kind of tests are applied in terms of viability being a material consideration, it is challenging, as all of you are on panels will know better than I. But I think that would be beneficial. I think clearly as part of, it's a separate process in the SIL review in terms of LLP 2040, but I think at this point in time, we know we need to think really carefully about infrastructure as part of Leeds Local Plan 2040 with the amount of growth that's being envisaged. if this number is to be agreed, that needs to come with the requisite infrastructure. We need to be confident in the mechanisms that we have deliver that. And as we've said in the draft response, it is unclear at this point what those mechanisms are to provide us with that confidence.
Thank you, Adam. Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Chair. Going to go on to the comment we've gone on, which is obviously about actually making them build. And I think you're just being a little bit too polite in this, if I'm completely honest. It's suggesting the government should go away and look at things. Actually, I think it would be useful if we said as a local authority what we think would actually work, because in the end, you're the one having to deal with some of these issues. And with the great respect to the government, they will be looking at a variety of feedback. And I think we should just be a little bit more forceful actually on what we want to see be delivered to make that happen, rather than just suggesting to government, why don't you go and look at it? Because clearly the market is not going to deliver that unless it's got a very large and polite boot up the rear end, to be quite blunt, because it has no financial interest in delivering that, because it wants to maximise the value of the land and therefore the value of the asset it sells. I would agree with the comments that have been made, and I'm glad you, as officers, you agree around, actually let's have that real strong argument about mandatory actual affordable housing. If you can do it for one part of the planning system, it means you can do it for the other part of the planning system. And I think it's a more general piece, you know, and again, I like Colin, I'm not going to pretend I've read every single one of these. I think something along actually challenging the developer community's viability challenges with us. If they're making a profit, they're making a profit. That should be the basic line in capitalism. If you're making a profit, something is viable. Just because you want to make 20% profit rather than 10% profit is neither here or there. The basic line is you've made a profit. And actually, we're giving up far too many, or the current planning system is giving up far too many conditions that we deem, that the MPPF deems to be a necessity, on the altar of viability. Because the developer will go, well, I can't quite do that because that's going to cost me a little too much per square footage, so can you get rid of that instead for me, please? And I think we need to be a bit stronger and a bit bolder in saying that actually this is not delivering, as obviously the new MPPF is looking at good design, it's not delivering good design, because actually part of that package of good design is fulfilling those commitments, and they're arguing every commitment away possible because it's just not making quite enough profit for them. And I'll leave my comments there.
Can I just dive in at that point, because, as you know, it's a subject dear to my heart. What you forgot to say was, if you can't do these things, it's not viable.
Yeah.
Therefore, why are you doing it? Well, we're doing it because we can effectively get a subsidy from the local authority, because they say we don't have to do things that we'd expect to happen in other developments. So in effect, that's a subsidy, in my opinion. So they can only do a development with the subsidy from the local authority, and it's enshrined in law that happens. That strikes me as ridiculous.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Thank you, Chair. I think, yeah, I think we can certainly beef up the wording there to make that point a bit more forcefully. I think this panel and I dare say many others, we've obviously discussed that viability issue, and we're obviously operating within a national system here, and we're obviously doing our best to do that. But yeah, no, I think that they're helpful comments, Councillor Ray, and we'll try and beef up that language to make that clearer.
Councillor Lennox.
Thank you. I just wanted to share a couple of more reflections about the affordable housing comments that are in the in the response. And I just think it's been mentioned a little bit. The biggest point I think I've seen in here is that local planning authorities and local authorities should be able to set the type of affordable housing products that we need in that area. I think that's a really good point, because because what we've got in terms this housing crisis, what it is really is an affordability crisis, and we're going to talk about that more when we come to the SHMA, and I've been waiting on these figures about affordability and wages in the SHMA for months, and I'm really glad we're going to get to talk about them. being able to set the affordable product that is required in certain areas of our city is going to be the biggest tool that we've got locally to make sure that we are meeting that need. There is no point in building affordable ownership houses only in any development, in my opinion. We have immense need across all of the city for social rent in reality, and like I say, we're going to talk about this when we get onto the Shmara in a bit, where affordable housing is less and less affordable as years go on and as wages stagnate further and further and as rents rise and rise and rise. So I really welcome that. I really welcome the clarity in here about social rent being the most affordable and the most important tenure to prioritise. We need a toolkit which works with the MPPF as it's going to be, and also with Homes England and with various funding formulas. We need a toolkit to be able to meet the need that we're seeing. So I'd just like to welcome the points made from about point 47 to about 50 something about affordable housing, and just welcome them being as clear and strong as they are, because this crisis is an affordability crisis. If rents were capped, you know, or if in relation to local earnings, or if there was a requirement for 50% or 100% affordable delivery in certain schemes, we would be getting further to meeting what we need. I just think as well, we're seeing developers and partners keen in some areas and keen in some organisations to deliver 100% affordable units with us. That's what we have this model for. We have commuted sums which have been able to deliver 100% affordable units, which is an actual meaningful way to tackle the housing crisis. So we need the expansion of that sort of toolkit and those options being given to us by the government alongside this framework with the Homes England funding as well. So I'd just like to put that on record and thank you all for how clear you've been about the need.
Any come back on that, Adam?
I don't think so.
No. Okay. Anybody, anything else?
Sorry, just one more thing.
Just to say thank you, Councillor Lennox. It's just this response has been supported by colleagues throughout the council. So those points are a kind of broad church kind of reflection. And yeah, thank you. I completely agree. I think just that one point about beneficial. I think that this term first homes has also been removed. It was a product that clearly the industry aren't particularly interested in either, but don't meet the needs of our city. So that's a really welcome change, albeit minor.
Thank you. Okay, Mike, a couple of comments from myself. I think sort of how we enforce builders to build is an important question, and is it a case of we don't give planning permissions that last 5, 6, 7, 8 years before they have to start? Do we actually have to cut that down? On affordable, that definition of what is affordable, that does definitely need looking at, because Councillor Lennox mentioned for the average wage in an area, but even that for some people living in an area may not be affordable, where the average wage is fairly high, but you're a lower wage earner, then you're in a mess. The piece on energy efficiency, well, I want to highlight because we discussed this last time. Are we happy with the comments in there about it? Do we also want to raise that separately with the planning minister? That's a question just for everybody. Are we happy with those comments and leaving it at that? Yeah? Nay? Oh, go on, Alan.
Yeah, just to reaffirm we are going to make our own submission, so I don't think I sort of leave it to others to make that comment. So I'm going to be honest in the spirit of noting what's said, not particularly contributing to it.
Okay, is everybody happy then that we just leave it at the comments in the consultation response? So I think they cover everything. Okay, Thank you for that, Alan. Okay, so right.
Chair, sorry, just it just came in. I don't know if Councillor Lennox would disagree, but actually that word affordable housing should actually we be suggesting they change the wording to truly affordable, because that's a very different statement actually, and actually part of the issue with the language of affordable. And actually, if we're going to make a point about this, we need to be talking about truly affordable housing, not just affordable housing. I'll let Councillor Lennox maybe come.
Thanks, Chair. I can't remember whether it was the last DPP or another meeting where I said that we are letting developers off the hook by the government's classification of affordable housing being what it is. If we're going to use the term affordable housing, it should mean truly affordable housing. I completely agree. It's also something that we, as we've discussed, have got in local policy. And as Councillor Campbell said, if it's not viable, when they're if delivering the percentage required is not viable, then it's not a viable scheme. That's what our position should be. But I completely agree that the concept of affordable housing as it's become defined when we're coming to sort of planning and house building is a misnomer. That's not what it means. it means a sort of arbitrary rent reduction level that is no longer meaningfully affordable. And as I mentioned, we're going to look in the next bit that the only rent. I'm just looking